Okay, so today we are starting with chapter 3, and the title that Daehaeng Sunim gives is really interesting. You know, in the original, there's no titles, right? It's just, it wasn't even originally split up. It was just one solid piece of text, but somebody added divisions and then they added titles as time went on. And the title that Sunim gave to this is The Essentials of the All-Encompassing Great Vehicle, right? Which you could say the essentials of the Mahayana. Mahayana is, it's the northern school of Buddhism in the most simple sense. But the style of Buddhism that it really means is the all-encompassing, the non-duality. Everything is one whole, is actually the meaning of Mahayana. And so when Sunim says, you know, this chapter is the essentials of the Mahayana, that's kind of a big deal, because she's saying here that you know, this is the key, right? Everything starts with this chapter. Okay, so let's see what she thought was the key. I'll go ahead. This is a fairly short chapter, just 2 pages. So I'll go ahead and let's see, how shall I do this? I'll go ahead and read it through the whole thing one time. So the Buddha spoke thus to Subhuti: the moment you truly realize that all the inner lives within you are not separate from your fundamental mind, all of those lives immediately submit to and follow your fundamental mind. All of these beings, born from eggs or womb, moisture or transformation, are all inherently connected as one. All of these beings, whether material or immaterial, whether having form or formless, are all ceaselessly changing and transforming, functioning as one flowing whole with no divisions of time or place. Thus, this fundamental self that isn't me can guide all those lives to the state where there is no separate I, where there is only flowing, and from there to enter nirvana. However, even though all other beings have reached nirvana, if you still have thoughts of I am doing, then nirvana will be unobtainable. Why is this, Subhuti? Should even a bodhisattva give rise to ideas of themselves as existing apart from others, or feel that they have achieved a level of spiritual evolution, or think that some beings exist at lower states of development, or that their spiritual work is constrained by time or space, then as soon as they think such things, they cannot fulfill the role of a bodhisattva. Okay. This is very interesting, because the title is The Essentials of the All-Encompassing One Whole, of the Mahayana. And Sunim doesn't start with a description. She starts with more like instructions for practice, a description of practice. So I'm looking at page 47. 이거 47쪽입니다. And the very first paragraph: the moment you truly realize that all the lives within you are not separate from your fundamental mind, all of those lives immediately submit to and follow your fundamental mind. So this is really interesting, because the very important point here, working backwards at this, is Daehaeng Sunim must have thought it's very important for you to know that those lives in your body follow your fundamental mind, right? If you do this, they follow your fundamental mind. And the obverse, or the reverse of that, is the implication that they aren't following your fundamental mind. Well, this is interesting, because it's it's implying they're just going off and doing their own thing, right? These lives within us are just, and I talked about it a couple of weeks ago, but that's kind of the definition of cancer, isn't it? The lives just going off and without any connection, without any self-awareness, going off and doing their own thing, irregardless of what happens to everything around them. You know, and you can see in society as well that if somebody is just selfishly pursuing their own interest to the extreme, it's extremely bad for society. There is no society if people don't take other people's well-being into consideration. You don't have to make other people's well-being your center or your operating basis, but you have to take it into consideration. You know, and I think if these, Daehaeng Sunim talked about these lives within us. I talked about it last time, where she called them karmic states of consciousness, or the Korean is opshik. These karmic states of consciousness are basically echoes. They're re-recordings from the past. We did something one time, and if we really focused on that, it became input. And like a recording or like an echo, it comes back out later. And so you may be going, you may be, you know, I said it last time, but you may suddenly feel sad. You may suddenly feel happy. You may suddenly feel angry with no obvious reason. It just comes out of the blue. And in some ways, that might be these old states, karmic states of consciousness. And if we don't do anything about them, if we just react to them, if I get angry, if I get sad, if I just react to it, you know, I'm angry or I'm sad, so I try to find something to make myself feel better, and I just react to it, or I get angry at other people. In that case, I'm just re-recording it. I'm just re-inputting it. And one of the things that Daehaeng Sunim said a number of times is that when you do that, what happens is, good or bad, they gradually get stronger and stronger. So even though you don't intend to, the thing that was a little bit bad, as time goes on, if you just keep re-recording it, it gets worse and worse and worse and worse. The good things would be the same way. But this is, you know, they talk about the wheel of reincarnation, right? Or the wheel of causality. It just keeps going around and around and around. And you just keep going, you know. It's the idea of somebody doing enough good things that they are born in a really good home. They're born very wealthy. And they're so wealthy that they become lazy and behave badly and wind up doing a lot of harm. It causes themselves to be reborn in a bad place. And, you know, just time after time after time for eons. One of the, you know, Kunsim mentioned a couple of times that one of the really scary things is that once you get born in a certain state, sometimes it's really hard to get beyond the habits of that state. So if you're born in the form of an animal, going from a human state to an animal state is pretty horrible, because you had to have a lot of animal habits to get there, right? But imagine you're a human being, you're a very badly behaved human being, but you still do what you want to do, right? You still get up when you want to get up, you within some boundaries of work or whatever. You can go where you want to, you can decide what you want to eat for dinner. You live your life more or less according to your own intention or your own will. But now if you get born as a dog, you can't do that stuff necessarily. You want to do something, but people don't treat you that way. All the things you used to do just on your own, now you can't do. And so that's very unpleasant. And not to mention you might, you probably don't get treated well depending on where you are. But the other thing is, we gradually become accustomed to where we live, right? Living in Korea, there's some habits that I pick up as a person, And people in Korea live this way. So, if I give something to somebody, I give it with two hands, or with one hand on my arm, one hand like this. That's just the way you do things in Korea. You get used to these habits and you pick them up and they make your life more comfortable and they make your life better. But it's the same thing with wherever you're born. You learn what works in that situation. If you're a dog and you're born someplace where the dogs are wild, like imagine Thailand or Indonesia or someplace, right, with all the stray animals, then what happens? How do you live? You kind of have to live like a dog, right? If there's food, you have to grab it, and you have to fight for it, and you have to do all this kind of stuff that you don't have to do as a human being. But now imagine you live for 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years, and you've reinforced that habit. And it's like, now I'm the top, literally in English, the top dog, right? I'm successful. But what have I done? I've recreated the habits at this level. I've made them firmer, I made them stronger. And so even the habits, even in the human realm, you can think there are a lot of different types of habits. So some people are very, some types of business people are very tough, right? They never give anybody a break. They always push them for the last 10 cents, the last dime, and just really, if they see a chance to take advantage of somebody, they take it. And they're a human being. Somebody like Gandhi or Mr. Rogers, or somebody, I don't know if everybody here knows Mr. Rogers, but he was a children's talk show host who was a very kind, very gentle person. He's also a human being. Those are habits somebody's making in the human realm. So there's a huge variety of these habits we can make. And depending upon the circumstances, they may be helpful to us, they may not be helpful to us. Even the habits from one era, one generation to the next generation may or may not be helpful. So the same habits that, if you were a successful public official 100 years ago, right, or 150 years ago, those same habits might not help you out very much in this time and era, right? The way of doing things has changed. And so if we're just reacting to those things, we're just recreating those old habits. And some of them may be helpful, some of them may be very unhelpful. But if we entrust them, if we let them go back inward, then when they meet this, in English or in Korean, we use the equivalent of the word fundamental mind, or you can say true self, or true nature. You can say God or divinity. All of these words are approximations just to get people pointed in the right direction, because there's no words that can describe it, right? No words are going to be appropriate for it, but it's just a way of kind of pointing people in the right direction. But when we entrust something, when we entrust it back into this inner foundation, this inner true nature, Buddha nature, then it dissolves. And when it makes contact, when it dissolves and makes contact with it, then it reacts to the whole. It reacts to this flowing whole. And because it's the whole, because it's the energy of the whole, it's automatically suited towards where we are and where we want to go. It comes back out as something helpful to us that's in touch with the whole. If my actions are based on my own selfish preconceptions, right, then that's going to be the limit of them. But if my actions are based on my unconscious even sense of my connection with everybody else, then those actions are going to be helpful to everybody else, and they're going to be helpful to me because I'm part of this whole. Whatever it is that I end up doing is going to be beneficial to everyone. And you know, sometimes the action isn't what you think it is, right? Sometimes giving something is helpful to somebody, sometimes taking away something is helpful to somebody. So sometimes you see both things happening. You know, if a parent spanks a child, it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? It's like, hey, you really need to stop behaving like this, because that kind of behavior is going to cause you problems. But the key is, you know, this is what Sunim talks about. When all the habit energy, when all that old consciousness connects with your fundamental mind, then it automatically flows in tune with your fundamental mind, right? Imagine a whirlpool, and now all of a sudden all the water is flowing in tune with the whirlpool. Everything goes a lot smoother. It's like the example I've given before. It's like driving down the road and not knowing the traffic rules. Right? Imagine you're an alien and you just show up driving behind a car. It's like, hey, why should I stay in these lanes? All these lanes over here are completely wide open. So I'll just drive in the left-hand lane. Oh, it's great, no cars, this is wonderful. Now all these people are, you know, honking their horn at me and waving one finger at me and saying bad things. What? This is weird, you know. Okay, and there's a red light, and sometimes that means there's no cars in the middle, so I can drive in the middle. And you know, if you don't actually know what's going on, life gets pretty rough. But if you're moving in tune with the way things are really working, then all of a sudden everything becomes much smoother. If I'm saying, oh, you're separate from me, he's separate from me, she's a completely separate person, whatever happens to her doesn't happen to me. If you look at like the history of countries that have had a rough time, most of them start with something like, we are the superior race, right? We are pure, or we are cleaner, or we are something other, we are better than these people over here. And when they start splitting themselves off like that, then the next step is, well, because we're better than them, we know best. We can do something to them. And then the next kind of evil state is, well, these people aren't really quite human, right? So they don't feel pain like I feel pain. You see this even in old English literature, where like the upper classes were like, well, you know, sometimes people say things like, well, the lower classes don't really feel pain like we feel pain. You know, it's kind of crazy, but when people, because we're one whole, if you start treating part of the whole like this, you're part of the whole. That's going to come back around and affect you. That's going to come back around and hurt you. And so, you know, people think, they look at a country and they say, oh, they got away with it, right? This country invaded another country, or they did these horrible things, and they were never punished for it. But if you look at the details of the history of that country, there's all kinds of ugly stuff. You know, there's invasions, diseases, mass addiction, all kinds of stuff in that country's history. And, you know, oh yes, there was this epidemic of yellow fever that killed 100,000 people or killed 1 million people. And, oh, well, you know, maybe that didn't just happen, right? I was in Brussels, Belgium, at the old, what was it? It was the Palace of Justice. And in front of it, it had a memorial to the Belgian victims of World War I and World War II, I think. And Belgium suffered a lot in World War I and World War II. The Germans invaded both times to fight the French and went right through the country. And there was a lot of misery in Belgium during World War II. And I remember thinking, oh, this Belgium seemed like a wonderful country, a beautiful place. I really liked the energy and the people. And it's like, how come such a nice country had such terrible things happen to it? And then I looked over at the Palace of Justice. It had these massive Greek-style columns. And downtown in the town in another area, there'd been it was like a Belgian colonial museum. Oh, that's right, Belgium occupied a big chunk of Africa, and there were really horrible atrocities. Maybe that's why things went so badly here. And I can't say I don't have any enlightened perspective that that's exactly why that happened. But this idea that we can treat other people as separate from us, as less worthy than us, is just the most deadly, disastrous kind of thing that can happen to a country. There's nothing good comes from that. It's like, it's like saying, only I need clean water. Right? These people over here, they don't need clean water. If their water's a little bit poisoned, or their air is poisoned, I'm fine. Well, if the air is poisoned or the water is poisoned, I'm probably going to have trouble too, right? So, this idea of that we form one flowing whole, and that when we take all the habit energy that wants to see things differently, and we return that to this fundamental mind, it starts moving in tune with this energy of the whole better than it was. Maybe not perfectly, but it starts moving in tune better. Just, you can do a thought experiment of this very easily. If you pick up anything, any person, and you start saying, oh, it's his fault, I don't have any hair. Right? So anything, the more ridiculous, the better. It's his fault, my hair fell out early. Or it's his fault, and just start blaming them for anything. Gradually, you'll start resenting him. Maybe not even gradually, it can be just like that. Just, and just some kind of feeling. But if you reverse it, his mind and my mind are one mind. His body and my body are one body. His life and my life are one life. And you just repeat this. You're just saying words out loud, right? But you repeat these words and you let them sink down within you. And just doing that, you start feeling a little bit better, right? It's really kind of amazing. And I think the reason is because when you input that thought or that intention or those words, even though you don't realize it, even though we're not aware of it, all the lives, all the consciousnesses that make up the lives of our body hear that, right? They pick up on that as if like it was instructions. So just saying something like, I can do this, or I can't do this. Oh, this is too hard, I can't do it, I can't do it. Or I feel sick, I feel sick, I feel sick. It's like we're giving instructions to the lives of our body. I mean, sometimes we may be sick. Sometimes the task may be a bit much. Sometimes we may need to take a rest. But if our starting point is, what are the things I'm telling myself, right? What are the divisions or the kind of the realities that I'm creating out of this whole? And those are something we really need to be careful about. So ideally, the thoughts we give rise to, we want them to reflect this idea that we are all one whole, right? That politician and I share the same life. We're part of the same whole. If they can live well, if they're happy, if they're successful, then, that's better for me. That's not necessarily a bad thing for me. we all need to go forward wisely. We also have to use our brain, right? I said it last time, but the Daehaeng Sim had some funny expressions in Korean for people's head. Like, so in English, the English equivalent is the lump on your shoulder, right? So the English equivalent would be something like, don't use that lump on your shoulder for a hat rack, right? You have a brain, you're supposed to use it if it's necessary. And so if somebody's attacking you, get out of the way, right? If you're in a very bad domestic situation, figure out what you need to do to leave, right? If the light is falling, get out from under it, right? If somebody really behaves badly and they just don't want to stop, you need to put them someplace where they can't hurt people. And we have a big place like in that nearby called the Anyang Gyodoso, right? If they're just not able to handle working and playing with others, then you have to use your wisdom to keep them from hurting other people. Just standing there being hurt isn't necessarily wisdom. So I'd just like to make that point. So chapter 3 is telling us that we all form this flowing whole where there's no divisions of you or me, now or later, here or there, right? Fundamentally, there's no divisions of you or I. And so it gets to the point. If you think there's a me that's separate from you, if I think there's an I that exists apart from us, then I'm disconnecting myself from this whole, right? I'm trying to deny the direction everything's flowing. It's like everything's flowing this way and I'm trying to go this way. And so nothing's getting done, nothing's working well. And one of the interesting things about the last part of this chapter is Daehaeng Sim says, should even a bodhisattva give rise to these ideas, then they can't be a bodhisattva. In English, that often gets translated very directly, very confusingly. If a bodhisattva thinks this, then they aren't a bodhisattva. Well, if you read it that way, it doesn't quite make sense, because if they were thinking that way, then they weren't a bodhisattva in the first place, right? If a bodhisattva was very selfish, then they weren't a bodhisattva in the first place, so why are you calling them a bodhisattva? It's kind of frustrating because it's not very logical. But when you remember that this is Subhuti, the Buddha's talking to. The Buddha's talking about people at Subhuti's level. And so the ideas of I or you that Subhuti might have aren't necessarily the same ones that you and I will have. Subhuti has, we're all one whole, but this person needs help. She needs help. I have to help her. She's really hurting, so I should do something. And this is a good thought, right? There's nothing wrong with this thought. But Subhuti is still, we should all get to this level, right? If everybody was at that level, the world would be a really good place. But what Buddha is saying here is there's one more step you have to know about Subhuti. There's another level you have to be aware of. That even this idea that you have to go beyond this idea that even you and she are different. You have to go beyond this idea that there's me, I've attained some spiritual level, and there's other people who need help raising their spiritual level. There are people who need help, and we do need to work on this. But this is all. We also need to get to that stage beyond that, where we're truly, where even that division dissolves. So in the Diamond Sutra, when it says, if a bodhisattva has this thought, they're not a bodhisattva, it's not, it's like I said, it's not the, the entry level of selfishness or the entry level of self-centeredness that we normally think of. It's this much more subtle level of perception. One of the interesting aspects that we came up with in our discussions was the idea that their spiritual work is constrained by time or space. This is also an interesting one. I probably am running out of time today, so I'm not sure I should go too much into that example. But okay, let me wrap it up with that. This is there was a little spot there in chapter 2 where Daehaeng mentioned this idea: take the lives within you and get them all to follow your one mind, get them all to follow your fundamental mind. When that happens, then the resulting energy, what comes back out, is in tune with your fundamental mind, is in tune with the fundamental oneness of us all. And so that's a much higher level of evolution. That's a much better starting place for us to go forward from. So we'll take a break and have a discussion here for a little bit. Thank you very much.